conference will now be recorded.
Good.
Thank you for joining the City of Kingston's Common Council at our Community Development Meeting. Today is Tuesday, October 27th. And Andrea Schott, the Council President and organizer for our meetings. Before we begin, we would like to go over a few guidelines to help us navigate the system as efficiently and respectfully as possible. We ask that members of the public and press remain muted and off camera for the length of the meeting. As the organizer, I've reserved the right to mute anyone who unmutes themselves. Council members, city staff, and advisory committee members will control the button. Good practice would be to mute yourself if you are not speaking to avoid background noise and feedback. If a council staff or advisory committee member speaks, they will raise their hands. The chairperson will call on them before they speak by stating their name clearly for our audio listeners. All of our meetings are recorded. Both video and written transcriptions will be made available to the public on the city website. Although we will not have public speaking tonight, you could sign up to speak at our council meeting by emailing Elisa Tinty or submit written comments by emailing emtinty@kingston-ny.gov or by dropping them off at the drop located outside the side door of City Hall. We also encourage you to reach out to committee chairs or your ward's representative. If you have any audio issues, send a text message to the following number, 8594-6120. Please note that phone calls will not be answered during the meeting. The number again to text is 845-594-6120. As the organizer, I've reserved the right to lock and pause anyone who has behaved inappropriately. Lastly, at tonight's meeting, we have in attendance Chair Alderman Doug Coop, Alderman Don Tollerman, Alderman Jeffrey Ventura Morel. Subbing for Alderwoman Rita Worthington is Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch. Non-voting council members, Alderman Rennie Scott Childress. And city staff from the Office of Community Development, we have Mandy Brook and Amy Peterson. And City Clerk Elisa Tindy. Thank you for your patience during these difficult times, and on behalf of the Common Council, we wish you and your family good health. I now turn the floor over to Chair Alderman Steve Shabbat.
Thank you, Madam President. Good to see a nice crowd here tonight. It is 6:34. I'm going to call the meeting to order. So we are in session here. We'll move through a couple things. I don't know. And we do have a guest tonight. I haven't met him, but I would like to thank our HUD representative, James Amenta. Am I pronouncing that right? Close enough, right? All right. So he's going to be giving us on the lowdown on whatever he feels fit, I guess we'll say. So I think that has drawn a little crowd tonight. It should be of interest to everybody. Let me just, I don't think we have, well, let me do the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to read the minutes from our last meeting? If so, I will accept all right, motion. Are you motioning, Jeffrey?
Yes, motion.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion to accept the minutes from Alderman Jeffrey Ventura Morel, seconded by Doug Coop. Everyone in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay. We're passed. Okay. I don't, Amy, you can help me out. Do we have any, I don't think we have any unfinished business, do we?
No, we have no unfinished business.
Okay, well, that's good. All right, so we're going to move to tonight's main event, shall we say. And just a word, I guess this will probably be the last meeting for a while. You can sit back and relax a little bit and just listen. From here on out, we got our work cut out for us. So Expect long meetings and lots of debate. And Amy is gathering all the information about the COVID grants. So we expect to start moving next month. You'll be getting information during the course of that time. And actually, Amy and I were talking today, and we kept getting cut off. So just tell, how many applications do we have, Amy?
I believe there's 23 thereabouts, and some are from the previous, the first round, and then there are several new ones. So I will send them out tomorrow. I didn't want to confuse people by sending them out too soon. And along with that, there's going to be one for Made in Kingston, and that is going to be for the upcoming December event. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with Business Alliance of Kingston's event. So Pat Courtney Strong submitted the application, and it will need, your approval. So we will discuss that next month as well.
Okay. Well, actually, the number sounds certainly more manageable than the last round. So we'll see how it goes. I'm not gonna judge it till we get there. Okay.
Yeah,
so without further ado, I don't know where James comes from. We'll try and get him out of here in case you're traveling. Get you home at a decent hour. So James, you are on.
Thank you. So I was initially asked, I guess, to hold, maybe you all might have some questions generally about your program and how it's doing, but also I think to start out with a bit of a 101 or a kind of a basic overview about the program, kind of from HUD's perspective. Is everyone kind of on that page as to what I should, maybe just a little nod in either direction if that's what you're looking for? Yes. All right, cool. All right. So as a note, HUD does have a CDBG 101 class, which is about a very intensive week of classroom work. So if we don't get super weedsy and you're already very familiar with this program, I would just ask for your patience. Historically, this CDBG program, which your committee runs the public participation part of, has started in 1974. It was a bipartisan act of Congress signed in the Ford administration. It's been historically extremely popular across the country. It has a stated goal of fighting the social, economic, and environmental problems facing the nation's communities by putting federal funds under local control. So the goal of the program is to fight the social, economic, and environmental problems facing your community by putting federal dollars in your control. Like most block grant programs, the program operates from an annual appropriation that Congress kind of debates every year. Essentially, every year, HUD puts that money through the grant formula, and you all get a new grant every year that's based on the overall amount of money that goes into the formula and how many communities qualify for the program. A qualification, for the most part, is based on population metrics, overall size, and how much poverty a community experiences. Since the program's creation, it was funded every single year. We've never had a year where it hasn't. And in some ways, it has even grown. For instance, Congress has brought the CDBG program into the federal disaster response portfolio. This has been special funding appropriations that occur around disasters. They're targeted to certain geographic areas usually, and they're all have an additional requirement to relate the funding back to that whatever that disaster was. So it's been, an example, tornadoes in the Midwest or hurricanes along the coast, or most recently, a global pandemic, which has been the most geographically widespread use of CDBG for disaster response. It's important to note that while that part of the program, disaster response, has grown, the main part of the program, which most people are familiar with, the annual appropriation part, that has more and more communities that meet the criteria for inclusion every year and has also had a shrinking overall appropriation amount. This has been small. This leads to smaller and smaller community awards every year. An example for your all's committee, The city of Kingston, if we go back to 2004, received about $1 million from the appropriation. And if we go to last year, you received just over $700,000 from the appropriation. So it was about a little bit more than a 25% cut over those years. My point in saying that is just to stress that your grant is subject to the appropriations process, and subsequently it's important not to think of it kind of like as a guarantee, which some communities may do. So what does the program actually do? Legally, it works through HUD regs, which are built off of the congressional acts, and they set the ground rules. The rules sit on top of the CDBG specific rules, sit on top of regular federal grant making rules. So if you have environmental rules or procurement rules or displacement rules that apply to all federal dollars, these include all those. They're governed by those, but they also have the rules that are specific to CDBG. And those are generally in three areas. There's a big chunk of rules around public participation and planning of the grant. There's a big chunk of rules around activity selection and national objective. And then there's another large group of rules along reporting and timeliness of spending. So I'm just going to kind of go through those areas of rules so that everyone kind of has a base understanding of how the program is mostly governed. So the first major area, public participation and planning. This is an area that, so the city gets audited roughly every 3 years, a little less than that on average, because the city tends to be what we call a lower risk grantee. So on our risk scores, the city gets reviewed slightly less than your average grantee. But public participation and planning, which is the first set of like large rules, the city of Kingston has also always done, well, I don't want to say always because I have only had you in my portfolio for maybe the last 5 years. But during that period, you've done exceptionally well on public participation and on your planning processes. You all submit 5-year plans and then annual plans, and they've always had a significant amount of public participation and data gathering done within them. So there are two big parts, which I just mentioned. First, every community has to conduct what's called a consolidated planning process. These are either 3 or 5-year plans. The city of Kingston has a 5-year plan where the community develops through deep public and interagency engagement and a lot of data collection. This public process has to create major goals for the community to work on for a 5-year period. So the consolidated plan is an extensive public participation process that comes up with long-term goals. And then in the last plan that you all submitted, you submitted it last year, you chose 11 goals, which is a lot of goals, but here's what they are in order so that you're all aware if you're not already. The city of Kingston chose affordable housing, housing rehab and accessibility, reduction of slum and blight, youth and community services, Midtown Broadway facade improvements, sidewalk improvements, support for business, improvements to public facilities and infrastructure, park master plan improvements, and lead hazard and prevention. And that's the order that the city stated them as their priority, with number 1 being affordable housing, and still a goal, but the least priority of the goals is lead hazard and prevention. So all grant funded activities have to tie back to one of these consolidated plan goals. Anything that gets funded must be working towards accomplishing one of these goals. If a CDBG activity were to be funded and could not get tied back to one of these goals, upon HUD review after the fact, the city could be required to reimburse the Treasury for funds expended for activities that don't meet these goals. So that's kind of like how, because the essential idea is that the city has spent all this time and energy figuring out what the people want, what the community wants, and then this activity that got funded was not in alignment with that. So it's essential to ensure that all activities tie back to the goals chosen. So once your consolidated plan is set and all your goals have been chosen, each community creates annual plans. So these are individual plans that happen every single year. And these are where you actually determine like where your allocation is going to go. This is the second kind of part of that. You submit one the same year, and as a part of that is where you kind of transition into the second large bit of regulations, which is the activity selection and national objective. In your annual plan is where you actually kind of choose what kind of activities you're going to be doing throughout that year that will get you closer to your 5-year goals. We always say in kind of like HUD regulatory world that there is a coin test for testing activities. And the reason is because it's a 2-part test. The most important things that every activity has to meet is it a listed eligible activity? And does it meet a national objective? So that's the 2 parts of the coins. Is it a listed eligible activity? And does it meet a national objective? HUD has a specific set of activities that are considered eligible. It's a very long and quite broad list. But if an activity was to be chosen to be funded and it did not fit into one of the categories on that list, then it fails that test. Kingston has historically not had problems with passing that part of the test. Very rarely have, I would say never have I seen Kingston choose an activity that was not an eligible activity. However, most communities, including Kingston, have more difficulty on the second part of the test, which is meeting national objective. So the second side of the coin, once you have shown that your activity is from the eligible activity list, is it needs to contribute to a national objective. So the activity national objective is kind of asking activity, who is this activity benefiting? Common national objectives are area benefit for low or moderate income geographic areas, low or moderate income person job creation, low or moderate income program clients, and all of these national objectives are on a companion list to the activities. So every eligible activity on that eligible activity list has potential national objectives that it could meet that are paired with it. So if you were to, let's say, build a park, that park, one of the potential benefits that it could have is to benefit low or moderate income people. But were you to build a park in an area, let's say a census tract, where the park would exclusively serve people with 6-digit incomes, we would classify that as very unlikely to meet a national objective unless the city had some extreme extenuating circumstances. And that side of the coin, that does it meet a national objective side, who is this activity benefiting, is the side that more communities struggle with meeting. Now, that kind of leads us to the last major area of requirements for Cdbg regulation. That's reporting and timeliness. HUD requires yearly annual reports to explain what you did with the money and like what are the progress on all the activities that you selected. This is a pretty self-explanatory part of the regulations. It happens through an online system that your program administrators all have access to and fill out a kind of preset report that has questions that they just have to set the answers into. The more common issue area is the timeliness section. So HUD requires that every community that receives these funds spend the dollars in a timely manner. That timely is what Congress called it. So then HUD had to define like what timeliness is. And they defined it with a timeliness test. The test is administered annually to every grant receiving community, and it's received based on that community's timeline. So it's 60 days before the end of whatever program year they have selected. And what the test measures is in your treasury account, where the city has access to all of its federal funds, has it maintained a balance over or under 150% of its last grant. So if the city has spent more than enough funding so that it has spent enough of its dollars so that its balance is below 150% of its last grant, then it has passed the timeliness test. But if it has 2 years worth of grant funding, so 200% of its last grant in its accounts, then it has failed the timeliness test. This is amongst the most common topics in congressional discussions about the Community Development Block Grant Program. And it tends to be a reason most often given for cuts to the appropriation for Community Development Block Grant, because the goal is to get the dollars out into the community. And if a community is not spending the dollars, it's giving the impression back to Congress that maybe the dollars aren't as needed. And that probably transitions us most easily into like common issues and issues that the city of Kingston has had, particularly because the city of Kingston has failed its past 3 timeliness tests. If it were not for the flexibilities that were issued due to the pandemic that we're currently in, I would have expected the city to have received a significant sanction of its grant funds due to lack of spending. The timeliness test will be conducted again this coming year, and that will happen on May 2nd. And I would hope that the city will pass it at that point. However, significant work and oversight is going to be required in order for the city to hit that goal. Should I stop for questions, maybe?
Does anybody have any questions about the timeliness?
Hi, it's Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch here. Can you just repeat the exact timeliness for the year, the $60 the balance? I was just writing it down and you went really pretty quickly, so I just wanted to write it.
Yeah. It's a fraction, and it's the top of the fraction is how much money you have left in your account, and the bottom fraction is your last year's grant.
Okay.
So you have to be under 150%, or you have to be at 150 or below. If we go back to 2018, you guys were at 173. 2019, 189, and 2020, 206. So the trend is in the wrong direction. The current timeliness, if we were to test it today, is 268. So you need to get under 150 by this coming May. And this is, I would not say this is this is not a rare issue for cities to have, particularly older cities. Cities, and when I say older, I mean cities that have been in the program for a long time, particularly because as the program has changed over time, the way that cities administer the program has tended to stick with older methods and has not maybe shifted. So as the program has shrunk in size, it has become common for older cities to maintain a similar amount of programs to be operated. So many activities with not a lot of money, which tends to have slower spending. Whereas were you to be a lot of our newer cities are out west or in the south, and a lot of newer cities, let's say you just received a grant for the first year in the last 5 years, they tend to choose less activities in an effort to minimize administration.
Steve, may I ask another question?
No?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So you're saying that we created a new 5-year plan last year?
Right. You submitted one in 2019.
Okay. So if we have money that was allocated prior to our new plan, do we have to align the money that we spend now with the old plan and the old goals and objectives? Or
every grant is tied up with its grant year that it was issued and the associated consolidated plan. So whatever goals were issued in 2017 are expected to be with the old Conplan's goals.
Okay. And then still be spent by May.
And the reason for that is that you planned how to spend those dollars back in 2017 when those were your goals. Now, if there was like, let's say an emergency and a planned activity could no longer go forwards, then it would be totally understandable that wherever you reallocated those dollars, it could be to a different goal that is newer. If the reallocation happened with under the new comp plan.
Andrea?
Hi, it's Andrea Schott. I'm just asking more questions about timeliness because we clearly have some work to do to remedy this, right, by May 2nd. So hypothetically, if we had a project that we wanted to fund and it starts and we write some checks, in January, February, but the project itself isn't completed until June or July, is that can we do that? Or does everything, like the whole project have to be done? Does every check have to be cut? Or can we, have paid half of it and said the rest of the half is just going to be paid in June, or we pay it in May and the project isn't done until July? Can you just kind of give us guidance on?
The test is done based on the amount of money that you have in your account currently. So it's just essentially as the city spends money, the city needs to reimburse itself from its federal account. And so at the end of the day, the test is just on what's in the federal account, not on how much you spent or oftentimes with cities of Kingston size, there'll be a significant amount of contracted dollars where the dollars are tied up into projects, but the projects just are not, let's say, sending invoices to being reimbursed, or maybe the activity has even failed, but just hasn't kind of reported that back to the city for fear of looking poor, like poor administrators. A lot of times those dollars they'll really hurt the city in that because they'll be waiting to be expended, not being able to shift to a different project, and also being held against you with that high balance.
Okay. It definitely wouldn't be a good idea to allocate money to a project that we know won't happen.
Correct. That would be very inadvisable.
Yeah, because that was just a project that was brought to our attention, but the construction of it wouldn't happen until, I would think even this summer would be early for it. So that's good to know. Thank you.
What I would say is, as far as if I was to average across other municipalities and kind of look like program wide, on average, if I was to advise a community on what kind of activities they should be looking at if they're looking to spend down money, the number one thing is to look at what you all already do well. Most municipalities tend to do public works quite well. Most municipalities tend to be able to spend construction dollars on things like community centers quite well. Things that require small and large amounts of contracts. So let's say homeowner rehab, or maybe a lot of public services tend to be slower spending because they have a lot of small contracts that make up their activity, as opposed to, say, contracting with the public works department, which might be like one large funnel. But it also depends on your current activities that you have a history of doing well. And I would tend to have you look at what you already do well and to shift money towards that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, James, I have a question. I don't know if it's a question or a comment. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So the fact that we legislate spending some of this money really has no bearing unless it's actually spent.
Correct.
Yes?
Correct.
All right. So I guess the problem, and this is a comment, not a question, and you work for government, so you know how slowly the wheels turn. even if we legislate something this coming month, I mean, the odds are we're not going to have it spent by May. I mean, we have to look for things that we can use immediately, right? Not going to be a long-term, whatever, nothing's coming to mind here, but, we don't want something that's going to be going out to bid and it's going to take a year to get off the ground. We need to spend it on, we need to actually literally spend it.
Yes. However, I would note that more likely than not, most of your money is probably already contracted. And subsequently, project managing the already contracted work is definitely a big part of this. Ensuring that whoever already has, my understanding is that this committee meets quite regularly to essentially contract work with activity providers. And whatever your previous funding has been awarded to agencies, they should be followed up with rigorously to ensure that they're submitting whatever your invoicing process looks like so that you can draw down those money to reimburse the city.
All right.
Now,
so ideally, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but go ahead.
I was going to say, new activities are an important strategy because if you do have something on deck that you can contract soon, then that could have a really big difference. I remember about 2 years ago, the city of Newburgh was in a very similar situation. We worked with them for a few months, and I remember about a month into it, it was quite a sad situation. They had a sewer line burst in the middle of the city. And it was a very large, very expensive contract, and they were able to fulfill it with CDBG dollars, and it drew down a lot of money, and it happened very quickly. Now, if the city has an opportunity like that to spend eligibly, I would recommend you take advantage of it. However, the biggest part of it is managing existing contracts.
Okay. So again, I'm not looking, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but probably a good strategy is looking for a project that's already up and running, right? We really don't have time to do things from the ground floor up at this point.
I can't judge what the city of Kingston is able or not able to do, but I trust that you all are more familiar with that. What I can say is I can give you some kind of general tips going forwards as to you're about to submit for further grant funding and submit further plans, kind of like ways to strategize staying out of this situation as you hopefully go towards the positive end of timeliness. I would advise you, as far as a trend for other cities that keep timeliness, they tend to have smaller amounts of larger activities as opposed to larger amounts of smaller activities. And it's because of this grant administration part where if you have lots of small activities, it can be much more difficult to just keep on the grantees, whether they're agencies or parts of the local government, just ensuring that they're spending the money can be more difficult administratively. Additionally, I would highly recommend that the city build timeliness into their contracts. So if you submit, if someone submits an application to your committee, you should include in your contract with them that they must spend down the activity in a timely manner. And if they don't, you should allow the city the freeness in that contract to reappropriate those funds elsewhere to activities that are spending more timely. Because if you all give someone a large contract and they have a contract with the city for that, you won't be able to just freely move that money elsewhere if they choose to sit on it. And additionally, if you do have folks that agencies or contractors that are not spending, it would be ill-advisable to continue to offer them new grants, as further granting to agencies that are already not spending will only decrease your ability to hit that number.
Okay. Jeffrey?
Hi, this is Jeffrey Ventura-Morel. You said we need to be below 150 in order to meet the timeliness, and we're currently at over 200. So do you have an estimate of how much money that translates to that we need to spend?
Yes. In order to hit your May 2021 number, you need to spend $883,000. $428,024.
Thank you.
Marty.
Just following up on this question, do we know
James?
out of that money, we don't have tied up? This is probably questions for Andy.
James, how much was that again? Can you read that amount again?
This was me. I checked it yesterday, and your amount to hit was $883,428.24. Although they tend to be pretty flexible if you're down to the penny.
Okay, I'm sorry, Andrea. I didn't hear you. You kind of broke up.
I didn't write that number down, but how much of that do we have currently that is, allotted for and we're working towards, we just haven't done? Haven't paid off, but the plan is to pay it off. Or we have a plan to pay it off, I should say. To pay it off.
What's not contracted, is that the question?
Yeah, how much of that is not contracted? Thank you.
Actually, when you guys allocate, we've gotten into sub-recipient agreements with everybody that you've allocated money to. The best thing to do, and this came up, and I believe that the mayor brought this up at one of the meetings before finance, was to move $500,000 that could be used for sewers, and it was coming out of rehab because you guys fund rehab with $250,000 every year. But with the contractors and the way that the economy is, there's no way that you can get all those houses done. So that's where the bulk of the money sits.
Anybody? Questions, comments? Anybody?
I was just going to say, I don't have that information in front of me as to which activities are the most overfunded at the moment. But I would say that it is very common for cities with large rehab projects, for the large rehab programs, homeowner rehab programs, for that to be amongst the slowest spending activities, because the administration of that activity tends to be amongst the most rigorous of all activity types, because of the amount of contracts and the amount of follow-up that is needed.
Steve, may I ask a question? It's Michelle Hurd.
It's frozen, so why don't we just go with Michelle and then Rennie?
Thank you. So if, say we have $500,000 hypothetically that was allocated to housing rehab per old goals and objectives, can we reallocate it to sewer?
Yes. You have to go through a process, which is known as an amendment process, where you review your old plans and you go through a new public participation process, which I assume would mean, I'm not super familiar with the City of Kingston's participation processes, but I'm guessing it means going in front of this committee. And as long as that passes and you go through your public notice and everything like that, then you can reallocate money as long as everything stays eligible and hitting a national objective.
Anyone else? Rennie?
Rennie has a question.
Yeah,
Rennie, Amanda?
my question is on something of a different topic, but it has to do with the process of approving these funds. So, we have the CDBG committee and projects come before us and we make a decision. And then any decision that we make has to be approved by the mayor as well, correct?
That's an internal to city policy. It's not, that's federal regulation doesn't cover how you all make the determinations of how to spend.
Okay. So we need to be clear on how it is our city has set up the process. So there could be a lot of freedom on the part of the mayor to reallocate the funds, no matter what it is that we determine, unless there's something very clear that says we have the final determination.
Correct. So the way that we generally look at it on the HUD side is there's policy and practice. We encourage you to always have written policy, and in absence of that, and you are required to have a written, what we would call a participation policy. And then there's also practice, which is like, what is the norm in your community? And HUD expects you to follow both, and we expect that the policy and the practice align. And were those to not follow up, were we to review and there not be evidence that policy and practice were going forwards, then we would issue findings of noncompliance and potentially hold the grant up in the future until that was changed. The City of Kingston does have an outstanding finding of noncompliance for lack of clarity in its policies and procedures, which I have been working with Mandy on updating the policies and procedures. But historically, the city has been governed, by my understanding, anyone is free that has more information on this is free to add. But my understanding is that you all roughly have an application, which is quite thick, which outlines your practice, but you tend to not have, and then you have a lot of council practices, but your policies are shorter than they should be. And my understanding is that Mandy's working on building them out right now.
Thanks.
Okay. Mandy, did you have a question?
Actually, I would like for James to touch on when activities are funded, that it's supposed to be seed funding, not something that they come back to us every year for the same project for the same amount of money.
Yes.
You can explain that to them.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So part of CDBG regulation, this is a more weedsier part of it, so I didn't mention it in my earlier overview. CDBG dollars are for lack of a better word, for new things. CDBG dollars can't be used for what we would call maintenance, and they can't be used for recurring activities. So were you to have a daycare program that is looking to launch a new elder care part, the city would be more than in the clear to add to a new program. However, we're a program to run every single year and receive funding, the same funding every year for the same activity on the public services side. That would be looked at more as maintenance and not as a new activity, and that would start to look ineligible because maintenance activities are ineligible. Regular operations are ineligible on the public services side. The public services side, the idea is that it's going to expand the service or to add something new to the service. Yeah, and it's also roughly the same on the what I would call it the hard side. So let's say public facilities, you can't pay with CDBG for a janitor to clean Parks and Rec because that's maintenance, but you can install a new basketball hoop in that Parks and Rec center. CDBG dollars are by statute required to be for bringing new things into the community and not for maintaining existing community infrastructure. Yeah.
Michelle?
Hi. So say we have an agency, an outside community agency, that they've been allocated money for a project, but we haven't put into the contract that it can be reallocated if they don't spend it or come back to us. and we're at risk of losing that money. Like, is that it? Like, we will lose it. Say hypothetically $50,000 of this money that has to be spent by May is tied up in a contract that couldn't be reallocated. Well, then are we just out of luck?
You're saying, well, $50,000 is you're allowed to have a lot more than $50,000 in your account.
No, I'm just saying if it was a contracted, like for an agency, an outside community agency, but they haven't come back to us.
The rules of, contract law is contract law. So if the city has contracted with an agency that they are going to fund something, the city is contractually required to fund that thing unless there is an out built into the contract. Now, if the city were to fund it with non-CDBG dollars or with a different year's CDBG dollars, potentially the contract is not that specific. But if it is that specific, then the city would be in a more difficult spot.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Anyone else? Third time. Okay. All right, James, I thank you for being here. That was a lot of information you crammed in there, and certainly looks like we got our work cut out for us. That's for sure. So I don't know. I probably will be calling you tomorrow, Amy. We gotta, gonna have to get some stuff to the committee and start working on this sooner rather than later. So I don't know, unless somebody else has any further questions, we will.
As a note of optimism, that the city is not in anywhere near the worst shape that I have seen a grantee be in.
So we're not the worst.
I have seen grantees over 400% of their timeliness. I have seen them recover from that point. With oversight and attention, this is very doable. It just requires the attention.
All right. Okay. Well, we will certainly give it our utmost attention here and get this working. So, anyone else?
Steve?
Amy?
James, Mandy, did anyone want James to address the eligible uses for the money? I know there was some controversy about Planet Wings. Has that all been resolved? Is everybody satisfied with that at this point? Jeffrey?
Yeah, I'm not. Jeffrey?
Yeah, actually, I think that's why that's one of the questions that was asked, because it seems like that project wouldn't be even start construction until after the summer of next year once the street is realigned. So yeah, I think that he answered that in a way, but still gives us a lot to think about, because it seems like if we allocate the money, it won't be spent on time.
Well, the $50,000 was for the asbestos abatement and the demolition, and the $500,000 was for the sewers in Midtown.
Correct, but because if I remember correctly, we were also being asked to allocate money for the design of the park, which we ended up not doing, which now it seems like that was the right decision, because that wouldn't have happened until afterwards.
Yeah, Mandy, am I correct? I didn't think we put that back in. Did we, or did we? That wasn't part of the $550.
No.
But we were thinking for the next round for landscaping, etc. Well, James wants to answer.
I just wanted to note that it's important not to, when thinking of public works projects, to remember that you don't have to wait until the end of the project to draw down, only as you get invoiced. So if you have a very large long-term project, And if you can get work started and invoices starting to be submitted, then you can draw down on those.
Right.
It doesn't have to, you don't have to wait until the project is, let's say, I just happen to be familiar with this project because I don't live too far away from Kingston. But let's say demolition can happen, in a month. You don't have to wait for the project to be completed to draw down for the demolition contract.
And we can spend money on design and engineering, right?
Correct.
Okay, anyone else? Okay. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you. Just kind of going off of that, because when we allotted the 50,000 for the demolition, which I think is the first step, so I'd imagine that would be done. But we also allotted the 500,000 for sewer work. And since that's a public works project, that would be an idea, right? That, as long as we have the invoices and pay, we don't have to necessarily have everything complete. Correct?
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you.
But Andrea, if the city has spent the money, since it's reimbursement, the invoices have to come to the city has to pay it. And then, Mandy and I, there's several documents that we'll need, which we don't need to bother you with at this point. And then we reimburse the city. So if the city spent the money on April 30th, we're not going to meet the timeline. That will not count. So the city has to spend it at least however long it takes to write the check and for the check to clear, and then we can reimburse. Because CDBG will not pay directly to the contractor, to the engineer for a city project.
Steve?
Rennie? Yep, go ahead.
So Jane, May 2nd comes, we're at 200% of our allotment, right? What's the process then for ameliorating that from your point of view? In other words, would there be hearings? Would there be like a guillotine that just falls and the money disappears? What's the process here? And is it something that's negotiated, or is it a really hard cap?
So that's I appreciate that question. It is a process. So essentially the test happens, then we at the local field office are kind of the intermediary between HUD headquarters and you all. So HUD headquarters runs the tests, and they, outside of us, will send you the result of the test and telling you whether you passed or if you failed, and if you failed, what the number is. And then you will be invited to join, the mayor will receive an invite to join a conference call with administrators at headquarters and us to have a discussion about what caused the failure. If the city is able to prove that the cause of the failure is outside of the city's control, then there's space in the regulation to forgive that. And there can be no punishment. For the past 2 years, that was the case. The mayor had a phone call with HUD headquarters and our director and myself, and the city was able to plead for the circumstance, and headquarters made the decision to issue no sanction. Rarely does a 4th year failure able to meet that test. 4 years running is a long time to say that the conditions are outside of the city's control. And I'm unable to predict what would happen because I'm not the one who makes the judgment. It's the head of our entire department that makes the final call. And so the normal regulatory sanction at that point would be to remove funding to return you to timeliness. So if you were, as you said, at 200%, it would be to withdraw 50% of funding from the city's line. Oftentimes, cities are able to negotiate for that to come out of future contracts as opposed to already issued contracts. And that flexibility is often offered, although is technically not a guarantee. So usually it would, the most common sanction is a future grant reduction of the amount required to bring you back down to 150%.
Michelle?
Yes, just going back to the top of your presentation, you were speaking about a week-long HUD 101 class. Now, is that something that is free to municipalities for people to attend? Where does that happen? And could it, their travel expenses to attend that be covered by this money? I think it would be great for, especially people in our community block office to attend this training at the very least.
Yes.
And then maybe this committee.
I've done it 4 years.
Okay, great.
It tends to be offered based on the availability of the Entitlement Communities Office, which is the office that runs this program at headquarters. Their availability. Normally, it happens 2-3 times a year. This year, it has not happened due to the immense amount of new work that office has had. However, I would expect it to happen again. I believe there was actually a virtual session that happened this year that was held by consultants. And the costs to attend is free, and the cost of travel and hotel stay is an eligible expense under your administration line, as long as you are reasonable in your purchases and meet all of your local procurement standards.
All right, good to know. Thank you.
And it's also highly recommended that at minimum, one staff member has attended that.
Anyone? Okay. All right, James, again, I thank you for being here. This was great, very informative. Nice to have somebody here. We can just shoot questions back and forth to you. So we appreciate you being here. Maybe we'll see you again under more pleasant circumstances, shall we say? Okay. All right. And with that, I believe that is the only announcements I have is that Amy will begin sending out, I'm presuming, are they going to come in the form of spreadsheets, Amy?
No, I will send you all of the applications. It will come in 3 different emails because the file is too large to send at once. They are grouped somewhat according to category, and I will send you a spreadsheet as well. I will do that. Great. I could do it tonight. I'll probably do it tomorrow.
Okay, Jeffrey?
Would it be possible to get hard copies if it's not too much work?
I guess, how many people would want hard copy? Other than Jeffrey, Steve, Rennie?
I would. BC would.
BC. Doug. Okay. Okay. Can I send it to you in the meantime in an email? Is that all right first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't you do that, and just whenever you can get the copies in our boxes, just let us know. But yeah, the email would be great. At least get us started.
I'll get that out. I don't know if I'll do it tonight, but tomorrow. They're all ready to go. So I can do that in 4 minutes.
All right. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
All right. All right. With that, I will take a motion to adjourn unless somebody has any unfinished business. Somebody want to make a motion? Motion by Doug, second by Michelle. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed to that? Anybody opposed? No? Okay. I thank you all for being here. James, thanks. Very good
Thank
session.
you. Right. Good night.
Well,
Thank you.